Any moment. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second Link for Growth TV national show to do with money and debt. And this week we're joined by Chris Ogle. Say hi, Chris.
Hi there, everyone.
And by Neil Emery.
Good to speak again.
And this week we have a special guest, and that's Fran Bios, who's the CEO of Positive Money, which is a research and campaigning organisation. It's been going for 5 years, and it campaigns and does research on developing an equitable banking system in the UK and throughout the world. Fran, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
Right. So we look forward to finding out a little bit more about Positive Money in a moment. Chris, we talk a lot about debt and everything, and even in the Telegraph today I noticed there were articles talking about how the global system can't continue and maintain its current run. Thoughts, please?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of of what we have isn't what we should have, and we need to get it changed. So, you know, the fact that we condition from the age of leaving school and saddle students with £40,000 worth of debt before they even get started is absolute lunacy. And you know, I spent quite a bit of today actually sort of researching some of the positive money type things which Fran's going to talk about. And you know, the whole system of creating money is in the hands of probably about 40 directors of banks, and we're talking about, I don't know, 2.1 trillion or 2.5 trillion pounds of money is being managed by a very small subset of the country, basically. More money being managed by those people than by the government itself, which is absolutely unbelievable that we could have let ourselves get into this situation.
Okay. And Neil?
Yeah, for me, the money system just doesn't work. It just seems like a pyramid scheme, like a Ponzi scheme that is going to just fall on itself time and time again until it crashes and finally dies. It's just nonsensical as far as I'm concerned, the way it's working at the moment. It seems almost as if the system is trying to saddle people with so much debt that they have this learnt helplessness that they can't do anything else. They have to abide by the rules with this debt, and I just think there's other ways.
Okay, great. And Fran, your organisation, Positive Money, campaigns for alternative banking methods. Neil says it's a Ponzi scheme, that it's going to collapse eventually under the weight of its own debt and everything. What are your thoughts from more, perhaps more research, deeper research insight?
Yeah, thank you, Diane. Positive Money works on looking at the monetary system, which kind of underpins the banking system we have. And as Neil and Chris have said, we have a system that's based on debt, basically. So the only way new money is created is by commercial banks, high street banks making loans. So when you or I go into a bank and take out a loan, there wasn't any money until the bank created it. And what that means is for every pound in your bank account, there's a pound of debt. And the only way we can actually keep the whole economy going is by getting people further and further into debt. So we're in a situation where I think we've got the highest household private debt in history, and yet that's really the only way to kind of keep the economy going. The recovery that we're told we're in is all being driven by consumer spending, more borrowing and more debt. But as we know, that laid the foundations for the 2008 financial crisis, so it can't really be the solution. And what Positive Money campaigns for is to have a monetary system that isn't based on debt, and where actually money is created free from debt and spent into circulation rather than lent into circulation as it is currently.
Okay, so are you saying then that because there is only a limited amount of debt that individuals can take on, that that there is ultimately going to come a point where people can't afford to repay it?
Yeah, I mean, you can only keep increasing the debt burden for so long, whilst not increasing wages and income before it becomes too great. And the real key ratio to look at is basically income to house prices, I think, and that's really an all-time high, and we're heading for a similar level that we had in 2008. And I was talking to my colleague this morning, and he is basically saying that the situation in terms of borrowing and debt and globally is looking very like we're heading for another financial crisis.
Yes, and I mean, even when newspapers like the Telegraph comment on it, you can saying that we are heading for a massive global debt and global crisis. That kind of indicates that it's not only, should we say, less well-known organisations who are making these comments, but also some quite mainstream media.
I mean, we're in a situation where most people work 2 to 3 days a week just to cover their rent or their mortgage, which is a pretty crazy situation to be in.
Yeah, and of course that's only going to get worse as in the UK, at least, as the housing crisis continues with lack of building.
Yeah, although I would say there's kind of the main discourse is around supply and demand for housing, and although we do need some new housing built desperately, especially in the southeast, it's not that these housing bubbles are being inflated through simply not enough houses. One of the key drivers is this money creation process. So in the 10 years up to the crash, 40% of new loans being made were being made to mortgage lending, and mortgage lending tripled in that time, which actually meant that house prices, I think, quadrupled maybe, or maybe even more than that in the 10 years up to the crash. So it really is being fueled by this money creation by banks, which is just limitless. The only thing that's stopping it is their confidence, really. So if they're confident in the bubble, then they keep pumping money into it, and that makes us all indebted in terms of, even if we're renting, it means, you know, rents are going up at the same time as house prices, and it's a really desperate situation because housing turns into assets rather than homes.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I read that. I watched a video with your colleague, and during that period up to the crash in 2007, 40% of the money that was injected in went into mortgages, as you said. 37% went into the financial sector, which is where we get this crazy situation where all the stocks and shares are at an all-time high, yet we're in a recession. So the money's just been put into that sector of the economy, which is enjoying this wonderful, and everyone believes, oh, it's wonderful, we're not in a recession because we've got all this amazing stuff happening in the stock markets, but it's just not true, it's just not real. And only 13% of the money went into real businesses producing real products and services. And when you look at that, you think, well, no wonder we're in a mess, because all the money's gone to the wrong places.
Exactly. And there's two really big myths that I think most economists think. Most economists think what banks do is take savers' money and lend to borrowers. Well, actually what they do is create money when they lend. And most economists think what they do is intermediate loans to business. But that's a tiny minority of all the business that they do. It's, like you said, it's around 10%. So actually, you know, they're not really fulfilling this useful thing in the slightest, and they're actually, like, you know, sucking money from the rest of us in terms of interest payments and all the loans.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, with that money going into the housing market, we're just creating a huge bubble. And you know, we'll talk about this later about students, but I think the average first-time buyer now is 37, and I think that's come down from 44 because the government have provided this 20% or whatever it is assistance. But all that did was get people going for more expensive properties and pushing the prices up even more. It's like, how much lunacy can one take?
No, it's quite depressing.
Yeah.
Neil, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the housing, from my point of view, so the housing bubble, there's a lot of lot of relevant things, and I agree with everything that's just been said. But there's also the thing that landlords are given interest rebates. So basically, we're giving 12 billion. I think it's about 12 billion pounds a year to landlords to actually buy their houses for them. Just because you have enough money to put a deposit down, effectively, we, as the rest of society, are buying their house for them. Now that just, I'm guessing that's something Positive Money would be against.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, once you start looking into the housing sector, you realise that there's just so many things that need reforming, like tax breaks for landlords. We focus on the monetary system because we think it's not only this money creation process isn't only a driver of unaffordable housing and housing bubbles, but also a driver of us all being in so much debt, of inequality, also having an unsustainable economy, and one of the bigger ones is obviously for causing or driving financial crises, so this boom-bust economy we have. So we're really supportive of other campaigns that are trying to also fix different parts of housing, but we just look at the kind of system.
Yeah, cool. And so on top of the housing, we have quantitative easing at the moment, and we did it to bail out our banks to many hundreds of billions of pounds, and Europe has just agreed to do it to 1.1 trillion euros, and this is all money that's just going back into the banking system to support the making of debt. It's not to do anything positive. I mean, personally, I would say we could have used that 1.1 trillion maybe to get rid of our oil dependency and maybe have some lovely new wind farms or something. But we're just doing the same old story. We're giving it back to the banks.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's something that we also are campaigning on. So in the UK, £375 billion was created, I think, between 2009 and 11, and that's a huge amount of money. It's about half the government's budget for a year, and all of that did was flood financial markets, keep stocks and bonds pushed up. So it actually increased stock and bond prices by, I think, about 20%. But obviously, most people in this country don't own shares in the stock market, so all it did was increase the wealth of those that do. And actually, the Bank of England came out with a paper admitting that quantitative easing increased inequality. And as you rightly point out, what it could have been done instead is actually use that new money creation, which was needed because the way the current system is set up, it needed kind of in the interbank markets. But what it could have been done with that is actually put it into the economy, but via the government spending. One idea is that you just divide it between people and distribute it, so everyone gets £100 a month for a little while. Another idea is that you spend it on much needed green infrastructure. And now that QE started in the Eurozone, we're actually called quantitative easing for the people, which we are some across the Eurozone, because as you say, 60 billion euros is being created every month, and it is doing nothing for any normal person.
So are you arguing that instead of it being quantitative easing, the kind of anti-austerity packages might be called Keynesian economics by a different name?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different terms bandied about. This isn't exactly the same. I mean, I think that there's kind of two ways to get new money into the economy. One is through the private sector, and that's that banks creating money. And the second way is through central banks. And quantitative easing is through central banks, but it's been used to flood financial markets. And we're saying it could be done differently. Another way is for governments to borrow more, but obviously that results in more of taxpayers' money going on interest payments to banks. And you don't really want to get into a situation where government debt is rising and rising, and it's forced into, say, looking to the central bank to create money, when actually it could be doing that now in order to stabilise the economy, stimulate the real economy, get businesses growing, and get more people employed and less people having such high debt.
Okay. Neil, the handing out of money sounds a bit like one of the Green Party proposals at the last election.
Yeah, so I'm a major fan of the basic income, which it's been proven statistically we could use the same amount of money we do currently, and everyone in the country could have a basic income that would cover their rent and food effectively, and then you tax them on everything they do after that, so that you increase the work incentive because you're not penalising people for doing a day's work and then they lose their benefits, for example. So I just wondered what Positive Money's thoughts are on the basic income.
I mean, as an organisation, like I said, we're like strictly on the monetary system, but I think most people working at Positive Money think it's a good idea, and it does. The idea of a citizen's dividend is one proposal to how you get the new money that you've created into the system, basically, by dividing it. And in the Eurozone, if the current amount of money that's being created was going to each Eurozone citizen, it would be 175 euros per month, which is actually, you know, quite a significant amount for people that are, you know, really unemployed and have incredible debts. But more broadly, I think the idea of a citizen's income does look very, very sensible, and as a part of social security for any state.
Yeah, and like you said, if the money goes into the people's hands, it was shown when we took up the minimum wage under the Labour government, that money gets spent, so it actually improves the economy. It doesn't just get hidden away, which is what is currently happening with any of the money we're giving to the banks.
Yeah, I think there's it's been shown, you know, many times that if you want people to start spending, then you give it to the poorest people, not the richest. And so far, we've just been giving it to the richest, and it's not trickling down. Indeed.
Well, I hope there's no one still left out there that thinks trickle-down economics works. Please tell me there's not. Hopefully that's been nailed.
I think there might be a few in government, unfortunately.
Well, that's one of the interesting things, isn't it, Fran? To change this banking system, that all the people that are in positions of so-called power are the ones who are tied up in the banks and part of the whole vested interest in keeping it as it is. And it was interesting listening to Ben today and one of his presentations, because he's saying that basically the banking system, there was no intelligent design in the banking system. It's basically a series of cobbled together rules and regulations that have been put together to stop something that's been happening that wasn't quite right and try and patch it up and tack more things on, with no greater end result of we just hope that works, because and actually it hasn't worked. And the system's absolutely, it's just built on, as Ben said, on sand. It is that the house of finance is now in a real, it's in a position of tipping over, really.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think it's only finance. I think all the systems that we have are, you know, need a rethink, basically, if we're going to be 9 billion people living on this planet. And people are really reluctant to do that, and the people that need to be doing it the most are the people that are most reluctant to think about systemic change, which is what we need. And, you know, we focus on the monetary system because that really hasn't been looked at, and basically money creation, as you said, is that understanding has basically vanished from public consciousness, the economics discipline, and policymakers. So we polled MPs last summer, to kind of prove our point that they didn't understand how money was created. Not that we kind of expected them to. And actually, we found that only 1 in 10 MPs understood that when banks make loans, it creates money, and when people repay loans, that money disappears. So it's really, part of our whole project is really just to educate in order to have a public democratic debate around this monetary system.
One of the things that Ben said that I thought was staggering was that the government, who have the capability to make money, borrowed 380 billion, I think it was, off the bank, who just created the money, i.e. created the debt, loan that back to the government, and then the government are paying interest on it.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, that's it's a very dysfunctional system going on, and there's a real. I mean, you might have noticed in the UK now, Jeremy Corbyn is advocating this people's quantitative easing, which is along similar lines to what we advocate, but there's a lot of misunderstandings and fear around the state creating money, and I think that there is a big conversation to have to kind of dispel myths and get the people that need to, at least, and to understand how the system works and how it could be redesigned.
Could you answer a question? So if the state creates money, from my understanding, that basically devalues your currency. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it depends how you spend it, right? So, there definitely would be a reaction from the markets if the Bank of England started creating money that the state was going to spend. But that will happen in whatever reform you do. And so I think people are, that's what politicians are most scared about when you talk about this. But you kind of have to get over that and say, well, if you created £375 billion that we did before, but we spent it very wisely on job creation and infrastructure that we need, there's absolutely no reason why, in the long run, that shouldn't make us a stronger, more resilient, more investment-worthy country. And there's no reason why it should devalue the currency or cause inflation. People are scared of.
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to ask that question, but that's what I feel as well personally, is if you invest in it in actually creating something rather than creating nothing, surely that has to be a positive for society.
And there has to be, I think the word is spare capacity. So at the moment we know there's heading for 1 million people on 0-hour contracts. Something like 80% of people that are self-employed live in poverty. We've got 1 million people using food banks to feed their family. We're definitely not up to kind of full employment, full capacity. There's a lot of job creation that could be done, and there's a lot of things we need. We need green energy, we need flood defences, we need social affordable housing that's also green. So there's no shortage of work to be done. The key is having a system which can create the jobs and get money to where it's needed, I think.
Would you say that perhaps the biggest problem now is that everyone's so frightened of market reaction, as you said, that they just think in terms of monetary money supply control rather than other alternative economic models? They've become kind of a bit of a cyclops. They're just looking in one direction and one direction only, and there's a fixation on it to the expense of considering any other alternative method.
Definitely, and also to the expense of considering financial stability. So after the crash, the Bank of England was given this new mandate of financial stability on top of the monetary, price stability. But really, all we've seen is governments targeting GDP growth and the Bank of England targeting this 2% inflation. So like you say, it's really like a cyclops, tunnel vision. And at the same time, you've got private debt going through the roof, which is going to eventually end up in a crash. There's no other way for it. So it's not even that we're not creating the economy we want, we're actually heading it off a cliff. at the same time. So it really is at the expense of financial stability as well as having a thriving economy.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about what's wrong, but perhaps in the second half of the show we could talk a little bit about more what we could do to make it better, to sort of help relieve the debt, to move the situation on. So, Chris, perhaps we could have some thoughts from you first.
Yeah, well, I mean, I really like the positive money concept, which is basically, you separate you've got a current account and you've got an investment account, and essentially what you use as your current account is what you would recognise today as you put the money in the bank and you trust them to give it back to you when you want it, and that's kind of what we expect banks to do. But what they've been doing is running amok with our money. But if the banking system could be changed so that you put your money in this savings account and then it's completely transparent, and they can only lend what's in that summary of all of those investment accounts. And plus the fact, if they want to go and like invest in oil fracking or something and you're not keen on that, you can say, well, no, I'm not having my money going into fracking, because actually they don't support that. And I quite like this model because this model is very, very simple. And what you're doing is you're putting the banks back to what they were there for, which is to look after the money and give it back to you when you need it. And why be more complicated than that?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, is it a case of, as it were, the gambling, for want of a better word, the gambling arms, the brokerage arms, the financial powerhouse arm, whatever, of the banking, as opposed to the high street banking, is the area that is causing a lot of the problems? Would you agree with that, Fran, or is that an oversimplification?
I mean, there is a case to separate retail and investment arms, and that could go some way, but it wouldn't address the whole problem, because really the financial crisis started in the retail arm through this mortgage lending. And so they're all mixed up together. So actually, rather than trying to kind of unpick those two parts of the bank, which is always going to be quite unsuccessful, we're going for a much more radical reform, which is kind of cut off their power, which is the power to create money, because they're doing a bit of pretty crap job at it anyway in terms of where they're allocating it to, and instead put them on a level playing field with other entrants to the markets. Like we're seeing more peer-to-peer lending and crowdfunding, and they're getting a lot of money to businesses. And actually all we're saying is put them on a level playing field with them, so they have to attract savers, give them a good rate of return, but also let them know what they're investing in order to lend. And then, as Chris said, have a separate account where you just do your transactions and you don't expect to earn interest on that. It's just where you have all your transactions taken out of. And what that would actually do is, although it might sound quite simple, it would take a lot of the kind of danger out of the system, because it would kind of decouple the payments from the investments. And so the transaction accounts, which is all the payment system, would enable us all to have a transaction account at the Bank of England. And that's actually quite, that would take away this too big to fail status. And the reason that banks have that currently is because they control such a big amount of the market share. If any of them went down, the payment system would just freeze and our whole economy would grind to a halt. So by separating out the transaction accounts from an investment accounts, you really decouple two quite different functions of money, like the lending and the debt and the interest and the payments, which is quite fundamental to having a stable system.
Yeah, would you say that the banks are too big to fail?
No, we should absolutely let them fail. If you look at the countries that have let them fail and have put bankers in jail, they've bounced back and they're incredibly strong right now. I think the only reason they're too big to fail, as far as our system is concerned, is because they fund the governments, and we should have just let them go. in my opinion. We should have just let them go. We'd be all right. We'd all be still here as people. We'd all still have homes. We'd all still have food. We'd all still have water. We'd all still have electricity. And there'd be a few less billionaires in the world. To me, so what?
Okay, Chris.
It's quite interesting because watching this video today, one of the reasons why people say you've got to leave the system as it is because our biggest money generating sector is the finance sector, and people are saying, well, all that tax revenue and everything else that we get from the banking sector would all disappear. But an interesting statistic from HMRC in 2011 was that manufacturing paid 3 times as much tax as the banks did in 2011. So it's a myth. It's a myth, like many things, put out there to scare people, frighten them. And actually, like you say, Neil, ultimately there is going to come a day of reckoning. And that day of reckoning is based on the personal debt problem that we've got, because when people can't afford to buy a house, they can't afford to rent a house, they can't even, if they can buy a car, they can't fill it up with fuel because there's just not enough money out there right now. And the jobs market, as we know, is going through transition as well. Not one for this show, but there aren't the jobs because technology is improving all the time.
Yeah, and I'd just like to ask the question about, obviously positive money is focused on your goals, but what you're trying to bring in, would that also include having to go to a stop chasing growth at all costs? Because I don't personally understand why we chase growth all the time anyway. I think that's the wrong way to measure a country's well-being. It should be health, happiness, as far as I'm concerned. But would positive money's vision mean we would have to stop chasing growth?
That's quite a hard question. I think that it would enable us to stop chasing growth in a way that governments kind of think they do now. And that's partly because, so when we're in the recession, which wasn't that long ago, only like 2 years ago, it was the actual money in the economy is shrinking because people are still paying down their debts and banks aren't really lending. So in a way, them being desperate for growth was them being desperate to get the banks to lend. In a positive money system, you actually wouldn't have this kind of money that is debt scenario. So if banks stop lending, it's not like we'll automatically tip into a recession. So won't it be this kind of desperation to get everything growing and everything moving again? But I do think that, and also we won't have this debt-based monetary system, so we won't have to kind of service the debt. So there's an argument to say that you won't have to have growth because you won't have such a heavy dependence on high debts. But I think the growth debate is kind of, I think it kind of can divert people's attention from getting to the fundamentals of like what needs to change, because I feel like if we transition to a green economy tomorrow, that would cause loads of growth, but it would be good growth, whereas getting kind of growth out of people taking on more debt and more spending as a result of high household and private debt isn't the growth we want to see. So I definitely like agree with your question, but I kind of try and shift the debate away from like growth or no growth, if that makes sense.
So when you're when you're selling the positive money story, so obviously this message hasn't got through to the public yet. So how do we sell this to the public? How do we get the normal person to listen to this message?
We say, do you want like affordable housing, so lower house prices, which actually in London, for the first time, Londoners do want lower house prices. And really it is about future generations. Do you want affordable housing? Do you want lower debt, so you're not indebted as soon as you walk out of university or as soon as you buy a house? Do you want less inequality, so less inequality in a whole system? And do you want a stable economy that doesn't crash every 10 years because of asset bubbles and basically banks going crazy and lending to the wrong things? And do you want an economy that can't be held at hostage by the banking sector? And do you want an economy that isn't skewed towards property and financial markets and can actually create meaningful jobs? And there's a whole lot of other things probably, but it's quite late in the day and my brain's fried.
Does positive money actually have an opinion on the way we measure the well-being of the country? Because right now we are just using GDP as a measure. Do they have an opinion on?
Yeah, I mean, we don't talk about it that much in our research that we publish, but I think we all agree that politicians are completely misunderstanding what GDP is for. Like, they are literally just looking at it and saying, if it's going up, everything's fine, and if it's going down, then it's not fine, and we'll keep hammering that home to the public. But really, it is a measure, but it's a measure of something very specific, and it definitely doesn't measure the health of the economy.
Yeah, exactly, because with GDP's going up at the moment, and we have 1 million people using food banks.
Exactly.
Yeah. Chris?
Yeah?
Okay. What?
I think Fran would like to go. We've probably taken far too much of her time, and so.
No, it's fine. It was really enjoyable. Sorry, I can't stay around longer. I just got a tired brain.
Oh, it was fantastic to talk.
Really good to meet you all, and stay in touch.
Will do.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah.
Fran talked a little bit about how positive money see the future of banking and stuff like that. Perhaps you could espouse a few other people's theories and comments about what needs doing.
In terms of what needs doing to sort out
the system to help relieve the debt levels.
Well, I mean, it's quite interesting. There's a. I mean, one of the things that is very obvious with the money that we've got in the economy, if we need more money in the economy, what we're doing at the moment is we're increasing debt. So growth in GDP terms and growth and health of the country is all basically based on debt, because you're borrowing money, which is money that's being created at that point, as Fran said. So in order for us to change that, we've got to change that model entirely. And there's 4 ways that you can do it, as she indicated earlier. You either get more spending on public services, you cut taxes, which gives people more money, you pay down the national debt, which reduces your financial obligations in that, or you give money to people, which was already mentioned earlier on. So that's 4 ways of getting money in the economy. But before you can do that, you've got to change the banking model. There's no other way around it, because if we take Europe, for example, we did say we were going to spend a bit of time talking about Europe. Basically, what has happened with Greece is that none of the money they've been given is going to help solve the issues with austerity. It's just going back to the bankers. So, and what's going to happen is that's going to drive Greece into probably riots and all sorts of stuff. That they're going to exit in an awful fashion from Europe. Portugal, Spain, Italy aren't in much better shape. Ireland's in an awful place, probably just watching to see what happens with Greece. Yeah, Greece have been treated awfully, and now we're going to see, and basically the others are probably thinking, well, we don't want to be dragged through the mire like that. But it's an inevitability, because personal debt is so high. And whereas in the first debt crisis, it was all about loaning and creating debt, but it was creating debt for mortgages, the subprime that went down the toilet, because basically it was just out of control lending for housing, which pushed the housing prices up. But now what we're in is we're in a situation where personal debt, and I got these figures, between £2,400 and £4,800 worth of debt for every person in this country. Every person, between £2,500 and £4,500. You know, that is a bad scenario to be in.
It is, but and of course it's ongoing, isn't it? In the
absolutely, because the banks, we've got, I think I mean, I don't know what years these were, but the banks have 108 to 217 billion in interest payments on money that they basically created out of thin air. 108 to 217 billion pounds in interest per annum. That is unbelievable.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is the way they decided to do it, which is completely nonsensical. Like you said earlier, that they decided to lend it from banks that made the money up out of nothing. It didn't exist, and now we have a debt. The government are fully capable at any time they want to create that money themselves. They could have created that money themselves. We wouldn't be in debt to anyone. One department could give it to build housing, one department could give it to build wind farms or something, and there would be no debt. But they chose to keep their buddies happy in the city at the expense of every single taxpayer in the country.
Well, I mean, Chris was talking about Greece earlier on, and there's a figure that German banks have already made $7.1 billion or 7 billion euros, sorry, profit in the 2 months since the last bailout.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need like a war crimes trial because they've just taken over a country.
It's a financial coup.
Yeah, it's just disgusting.
I was looking at some interesting statistics earlier on student debt, and I've got some figures here because this is unbelievable. This is how we're conditioning our young folk. Bearing in mind that the latest financial budget thing, we basically crippled young people once more, right? So we've now really stuffed them. But the student debt in the US right now, $1.2 trillion of personal debt, which is basically student debt, which has tripled in the last decade, right? Now we're going in the same way here, right? And I've got some stats here. Tuition loan of $7,800 a year, plus £3,500 maintenance. We're talking about £37,000 worth of debt. If a student comes out on an income of £26,500, right? What they didn't realise is that last autumn all the rules changed here, and now the interest rate is 6.3% on outstanding loan per annum compounded. So somebody coming out with £26,500 income, 5.3% increase per annum on their income, right? By the time they get to 43, the debt they still owe is $56,343 because of the interest. And by the time they get to 51, 30 years after they've left university, and it gets written off, that debt's $45,000. So 85% of the student loans out there are not going to be repaid.
Yeah, it's just nonsensical and tragic what they're doing. I honestly believe they've only done this to increase learnt helplessness in the societies, so they think this is the way it is, this is the way it must be, so people don't actually stand up and fight against it. I honestly believe that's why they did it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about what needs to be done. I think we've started to make some suggestions, but perhaps we should just sum them up so that we have a clear kind of like idea.
Well, the positive money, right? Positive money people, they've got 6 things that need to be done in order to rectify the banking system. All right, and I'll just go through them. The first one is, and Fran said this: remove the power of banks to create money. They can't just create money out of nowhere, right? So you just stop them doing it, right? Now that's the most radical thing, and of course nobody in banking or the government would want to implement something like that, right? Return the power to create money to a transparent and accountable group of people who are not in a position to be lobbied by the banks and not in a position to be lobbied by the government. So they're a sacrosanct group of people who are responsible for determining when and how to create money. Right? That's the money that's created is free of debt. So you're not creating money and creating a loan. It's free of debt. Only create money when inflation is low and stable. So if inflation starts to rise, you wouldn't be creating money because that just exacerbates the problem. So you only create money when inflation is low and stable. Make sure that the money that is created goes into the real economy, not financial markets and fueling the housing sector. And completely open and transparent control over how our money is invested.
Sounds
Okay.
sounds like a good plan. So on the other side of it, yeah, I would go into the creating money needs to be for infrastructure, and obviously for green infrastructure we need to get rid of the fossil fuel economy, so it would be green infrastructure. And also bearing into account the future we're going to talk about in next programs about the fact that we're heading to a jobless society because of technology. So therefore, it would have to be along the lines of some sort of basic income, starting at quite a low level. But in the future, we're not going to have the jobs, so the banking sector is going to have to take that into account as well.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I know that people right now are saying create jobs, create jobs, create jobs. But you know, as I was having a conversation this morning, and you know, we know now because of the trend that jobs in the way we've got used to thinking they are, because none of us existed in a time pre-jobs. We've all been brought up and conditioned to expect the world to be the way it is. But before the Industrial Revolution, people were around, they were doing stuff, they weren't in jobs, they were just like working together, creating food and all that kind of stuff, and they were, and the country survived. There were people, you know, blacksmiths and people selling drinks at pubs. There were people doing things, but it wasn't a job in the sense it is now. And we know that with technology and the trends that we're going toward, actually people are going to have far more free time. There's already talk of a 20-hour working week and all this kind of stuff, but all of this stuff goes in conjunction with everything else. If we start taking care of the planet, if we start harvesting the energy that's free, if we start to understand that there are 2.5 million people unemployed in this country, but how much stuff needs to be done. There are people out there who are lonely, who only want someone to go around and have a conversation with them. So that comes back to the situation of a living wage, where people can actually do things that need to be done, because you wouldn't want to sit at home being bored all day. If you're going to get paid anyway, you can go and see the neighbour and have a chat and a cup of coffee. You can go and do things that need doing, like doing a bit of gardening down the local, you know, bit of land, planting a few vegetables, picking up some fruit that's fallen down on the floor, giving it to somebody. You know, there's all these things that need to be done, and yet we've got people sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as part of when you talk about the monetary system, it's been a really, really interesting conversation, and it was great to hear the positive money thoughts. I'd heard of them in the past, and I'd seen bits and pieces about them, so it was great to hear from them. But when you tie into that, it has to go along. It has to go alongside making people more resilient in this world. And like you said, there's 2.5 million people unemployed at the moment, who are basically being told they can't do anything. They have to be couch potatoes, or they're punished, or they have to do like a boot camp And
yeah, like they have kids now, 6 months, isn't it, or something, and they've got to go on this boot camp thing.
Yeah, which is just punishing people for being poor when there's not actually enough jobs to go for. Which, think about how sick that is for just a moment. If there was a job for them to go into, that would be a different discussion. But there's not, and you're punishing him for it. So let's bring in some positive money. Let's bring a financial system that works for the people, and then encourage those people to go out and make the most of themselves. Be part of the community. Be part of the system that is a positive system. But right now we are demonizing a massive, massive proportion of society for something that is completely unavoidable. I mean, the jobs aren't there. And the financial system does tie into all that. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, so the theme of this show was about debt, and a world based on debt.
Yeah. So we need to get off the debt gravy train. The debt gravy train is a pyramid system. The money doesn't exist. We could decide at any time just to say, this debt isn't real. Let's just say it's gone. It's not real. All that would happen is a few big banks would go bust. There'll be some billionaires aren't billionaires anymore. We would all still eat tomorrow. We'd all still have electricity. We'd all still be fine. But we're just tied into this debt mantra. We need to transition from a debt economy to a resource-based economy where people are basically paying for how much of the earth they're using. We just this week.
I think, Neil, you're discounting the fact that there's a lot of fear when it comes to talking about money. There
is fear. People are fearful. People haven't seen the new way that it can work. But I can confidently say before the next election, there will be countries out there that prove to the world what a silly system this is. There will be countries that buck the trend.
People have already done it. Iceland did it. Iceland did it years ago. They just said, no, you're not having any money back. We're not honouring any of these debts. And for 2 years, you never heard much about them because they were kind of just busy rebuilding themselves. And now people are saying, well, maybe they got the right idea.
Absolutely. And it's not just Iceland. It's not just a one-off country. There's several other countries. Argentina, lots of South American countries have done it. The narrative of debt is something that certainly in this country and in America and a lot of Europe, we've just become accustomed. What we've actually become, we've become sheep. We've become sheep to their system. And if people just open their eyes and look around the world to other systems, it's completely unnecessary. So yes, we do need to break the fear. We do need to teach people that it's going to be okay, and we've got communities and we can work together. But debt's not real. That's the message we need to get across. It's not real. It's a made-up thing that is keeping you scared.
Well, and Diane, the whole concept of Link for Growth is about people supporting each other. Through that support and education and the conversations that take place, people will regain their boldness, their assertiveness. They will start to learn that debt's a figment of the bank's imagination. They just made up the numbers. And actually, you're not going to die if you don't pay it back. You know what I mean?
Just one little point on the fear thing. And it's a narrative that our whole society has, because even if you watch a dystopian film about when a country crashes, we all start killing each other. Every single country in the world where that has happened, where the country has gone into it, you know what happens? Everyone helps each other. No one goes out murdering and pillaging. Everyone helps each other. That's what we do. That's as human beings.
Yeah, and if you want proof of something like that, not in terms of a financial one, but when that whole thing kicked off in Japan, in Fukushima, they built roads that in 3 days, they rebuilt roads. This is people saying, we haven't got any money, we're in a desperate state, we need this road, let's just everyone muck in and we'll rebuild the road. 3 days, the road got rebuilt. A major highway was rebuilt. It's like when people get together, look at solidarity after the war, when people work together, when we work together as a team, we can do amazing things. And that's Link for Growth basically. Let's all put the effort in, go in the same direction and help each other.
Yeah, and and as we've been talking about debt is stopping that. Debt is stopping that community spirit because people are so worried about their own situation, they're not seeing the bigger picture.
All right then, well, I think it's time to end there. We've had near enough an hour. I'd like to thank Fran Boat, who's CEO of Positive Money, for her contribution earlier. And I'd also like to thank Chris and Neil. And we will be back in 3 weeks today, actually, isn't it? On the 7th of September?
I don't know if it's the 7th or the 8th. Quick check.
Yeah, 7th of September, I think.
Okay.
And we're going to be talking about inequality in the 99%, which I think will be another opportunity to add some views and to. I can see Neil's already chomping at the bit.
Yeah. That's too much fun.
I'm looking forward to that one.
See if we can get some of the 1% and the 99% on. Well, we're in the 99%. That's easy.
Oh, that'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Can we get someone from the 1% who's going to try to justify their points?
Mm.
Well, we'll have to try it, but in the meantime, we'll end there. And I hope that you people watching find this debate informative and it's got them thinking at least about ways and means of dealing with debt.
Thank you for hosting, Diane.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye now.